We're driving on Old Highway 40, just approaching Donner Pass. This is one of America's most historic highways, and we're driving it in this beautiful 1929 Ford Model A. It's the perfect way to revisit the wild early days of motoring over the Sierra. When you drive up Donner Pass Road, the first thing that you notice is the magnificent scenery. You have the majestic mountain pass and the breathtaking views of Donner Lake. But more importantly, as you stop to get out and stretch your legs, you'll be walking on some of the most historically significant ground in the state, because for thousands of years, any traffic that came across the Sierra here, whether by foot, by rail, or by road, had to come through this narrow gap. Standing here, we have history laid out before us. At our feet are the petroglyphs, which are images created by the Native Americans nearly 4,000 years ago. Below us is the Dutch Flat Donner Lake Wagon Road, which essentially follows the same route immigrants took in the 1800s. And above us, we have the tunnels and the massive China Wall built by the Chinese laborers for the Transcontinental Railroad. This old wagon road was originally constructed to service the railroad, but fell into disrepair. So in the early 1900s, when motor vehicles first attempted to cross the Sierra, it proved to be an extremely dangerous and potentially deadly undertaking. But despite the dangers, crossing the Sierra by car presented an irresistible challenge to the early autoists, a new breed of adventurers intent upon pushing their newfound mobility to the limit. The first to make it over in 1902 was George Wyman on a motorcycle. He was followed the next year by Alexander Winton, driving a car he built from a kit. It must have been a bumpy ride. In 1909, an informal race from Sacramento to Lake Tahoe was won by H.W. Smith of Sacramento, driving an EFM3 Roadster. The next year, the challenge was formalized in the Valvoline Sacramento to Tahoe race, which attracted a fanatical group of daredevils prepared to go to any lengths to secure the trophy. In June of 1911, George Starr and Arthur Foote of Grass Valley, together with 4 passengers, drove, hauled, and hoisted their Ford Model T Roadster through record snowpack, over swollen rivers, and seemingly impassable terrain to win the Tahoe Tavern Silver Cup race. As automobile ownership soared across the nation, there was growing interest in establishing a transcontinental highway. The route that became known as the Lincoln Highway was stitched together from stretches of road and track from New York's Times Square to Lincoln Park in San Francisco, crossing the Sierra Nevada at Donner Pass. The visionary behind the endeavor was auto racer and entrepreneur Carl G. Fisher, who convened the first meeting of the Lincoln Highway Association on July 1st, 1913.
The automobile won't get anywhere until it has good roads to run on. The highway will stimulate, as nothing else could, the building of enduring highways everywhere that will mean much to American agriculture and commerce.
Fisher's dream was to have the road completed by May 1st, 1915. He told potential investors, "Let's build it before we get too old to enjoy it." The proposed route was dedicated on October 31st, 1913, and celebrated with bonfires, fireworks, and parades in hundreds of cities in the 13 states along the line. But it wasn't until September 1st, 1928, that the Lincoln Highway, affectionately known as the Main Street Across America, was officially marked and dedicated to the memory of Abraham Lincoln by 3,000 members of the Boy Scouts of America. We can still find their markers on many highways across the country, including some sections of old road like this here at Big Bend. Car ownership was rapidly becoming part of the American dream, and road improvement became a priority everywhere. Just a few years after the Lincoln Highway was dedicated, it was replaced by US Highway 40, ushering in a new era of travel and tourism over Donner Pass. Undoubtedly, the most spectacular feature on Old Highway 40 is the Donner Memorial Bridge, referred to as the Rainbow Bridge. Built in 1926, it's an iconic feat of engineering and one of the most photographed bridges in California besides the Golden Gate. To cater to the needs of travelers along the route, small communities sprang up around motor courts, inns, and lodges. The growth of the skiing industry meant that mountain roads were now kept open year-round, and for the next 30 years or so, these businesses flourished. But just as quickly as it arrived, this new way of life would soon be bypassed by progress. This beautifully rebuilt Flying A service station in Truckee is a wonderful reminder of the golden age of motoring around Donner Pass. In the early 1950s, as America recovered from the Second World War, President Eisenhower unveiled his grand plan for the nation's highways, creating the interstate highway system we know today. With the opening of I-80 in 1960, many of the small communities and businesses along Highway 40 rapidly disappeared as travelers bypassed the local attractions and chose reliable chain hotels and motels close to the interstate. The glory days of Old Highway 40 are long gone, but much of it is still drivable today. You can still discover many treasures of the past along the way and experience the fascinating story of one of the most historic and beautiful stretches of road in the nation.